With the eventual release of Total War Warhammer 3, we know we'll at least hopefully get some form of Chaos Demons added into the Warriors of Chaos portion of the game. That's not to say if we'll get our own Demons of Chaos faction, or if we'll just simply get them implanted in some sort of current iteration. We already have Kairos Fateweaver as a Greater Demon of Tzeentch already placed into the game since Total War Warhammer 1. Well, one thing I want to talk about today is something a little bit different. I want to talk about Ku'gath Plaguefather. It seems somewhat fitting, considering all that's what's going on. But I know that Indie Pride did a really great video on like a Nurgle plague army. So if you want to see a really cool video that goes into a lot of the details of what, or at least how Indie Pride feels a plague army would come into the game, you can check that out on his channel. But this video today, I'm only going to go into Ku'gath Plaguefather. I'm going to talk about his lore. We're going to talk about his individual rules and how that might be translated into a Total War Warhammer 3. Now, of course, we're working under the assumption that we'll be working with a system similar to Total War Warhammer 2, so obviously we'll be probably getting some form of sweeping changes with a third game that will obviously mix up this formula. This is mainly me talking about the lore here and also kind of leveraging Total War Warhammer 2 against it to talk about some other fun features. There is a whole big giant book called the Tamarcon that was released by Forge World that deals with a massive Nurgle plague army. It deals with new Chaos Dwarfs kind of being added on the 7th, 8th edition timeline, a whole bunch of things. And we won't be talking about those elements so much because I feel like if we're talking about Total War Warhammer 3, I bet you a lot of the portions of Warhammer 3 are going to be influenced by that Tamarcon book. That Tamarcon book deals with a massive Nurgle plague army moving from the far east all the way through the Darklands and into eventual Old World. So it does deal with probably a scenario similar to what we might be dealing with Warhammer 3 when eventually that gets announced. So again, today we're going to focus on Ku'gath Plaguefather. We're going to talk about his lore, and then we're going to jump into those mechanics. Let's start off with our little bit of lore here on Ku'gath Plaguefather, Foetid Brewmaster, Plagueweaver, and Rotting Poxmaker. Whilst other great unclean ones work to spread the plagues already extant, Ku'gath the Plaguefather is fascinated by the breeding of new and virulent life. Ku'gath aims to one day breed a contagion that can infect the gods themselves. The Plaguefather prides himself upon his detachment. After all, what concerns could possibly encroach on this great work? So absorbed is he in his research for the perfect plague, Ku'gath remains relatively untroubled by the shifting balance of power within the realm of chaos. Yet this is not to say that the Plaguefather does not play his part in the great game. Ku'gath's experiments are nothing without practical results, and he is ever eager to test fresh creations on the battlefield. The Plaguefather rides upon a massive palanquin bedecked with alchemical paraphernalia. Vials full of seething powder, flasks of indestructible liquid, and Hessian sacks stuffed to bursting with Nurglings. This great bulk is held aloft by a carpet of straining Nurglings, and Ku'gath is attended on by countless others, all bred from the Plaguefather's pox vats. Ku'gath's Nurglings are not merely servants, they are also ammunition, for in battle Ku'gath is wont to hurl them into the enemy ranks. The unwilling projectiles burst on impact, drenching the target with disease-ridden fluids. Ku'gath watches keenly as each Nurgling's pox takes effect. Should the plague achieve Ku'gath's expectation, he gurgles with a proud father's delight. If the result does not meet with approval, Ku'gath immediately brews a refined version of the plague, dunks a fresh Nurgling, and lets fly once again. Of all Nurgle's demons, Ku'gath is the most willing to enter the physical realm. His quest for more efficacious plague reagents knows no boundaries. A few drops of mortal blood can turn a quiescent pox into a raging epidemic. Ku'gath has discovered that ground Skavenbladder, for example, increases the virulence of red pox 100-fold. Thus, in the cause of experimentation, Ku'gath makes a point of acquiring fresh specimens whenever he enters the mortal worlds. Indeed, the Plaguefather keeps a variety of specimens, mortal and demon, caged in a dank chamber among the sagging rafters of Nurgle's decaying mansion, so that he always has a suitable supply of ingredients to hand. It is during forays into the mortal world that Ku'gath has encountered the one race that has penetrated his scientific detachment to kindle his rage, the Dwarfs. On a professional level, the Plaguefather hates the creatures for their resilience to disease. On a personal level, he is embittered by a truly ignominious defeat beneath the walls of Karaz-Akarak. Either way, there is no doubt in Kugoth's mind as to the first test subjects when his perfect plague prepared. And that little last bit there, that spans a little bit of his lore too. He has two different incursions against the Dwarfs, and the main one, of course, being the one at Karaz-Akarak, where he couldn't penetrate all the many lines of defenses of the capital, the Karaz-Ankor. So Kugoth has that special embitterment towards them, and it's a very interesting mechanic that could actually even be spun up in a campaign mechanic for Kugoth, or at least like a Nurgle plague army in a Total War Warhammer 3 scenario. With that, though, let's talk about some of the mechanics that might be coming with a Kugoth Plaguefather. And one thing to kind of keep a note here, and I've talked about this before when I've gone in on some of the other portions of the demonic lores, when I've talked about the lore of Nurgle, the lore of Tzeentch, and so on and so forth, and then talking about the subsequent realms or the lores for those individuals. I've talked a little bit about these lords, these major characters of each pantheon, or each portion of the pantheon. And I think that it's worth noting that the demons are going to have some sort of innate ward or physical resistance, because they won't have any natural armor. At least most of them won't. Depending on what they are, they'll have some. Like for instance, the big thing with Nurgle and tabletop is that it had a high toughness value, thus being able to naturally be hard to hit. Because in tabletop, you had to roll to hit something, then you had to roll to wound something. And your wound characteristic was based off of your strength versus their toughness. And Nurgle's toughness was typically higher than most things' strength, so it was very hard to actually land a wound for it to go to armor save. So I think that'll be kind of one of the big things here with Nurgle, is that they will have some sort of physical resistance and innate ward save. I think that'll be indicative of any demon. But I bet you they're going to have, as a result, a high health pool and a high amount of melee defense. Maybe not a lot of melee attack, but definitely a lot of melee defense to kind of shore up that. Because I kind of compare melee attack and melee defense to your weapon skill and your toughness rating, as far as like the ability to hit and the ability to be hit. That's the best way to break down a weapon skill and toughness, as far as a 1-to-1 conversion on a Total War Warhammer scale to a tabletop scale. Now, taking a look at some of the other special rules here for Kugoth, he's a level 1 wizard who uses spells from the lore of Nurgle. I'm going to link in the upper right corner my video on the lore of Nurgle, so you can see how all those spells kind of coalesce into this, or how at least I would feel they would manifest in this game. There's a lore for Nurgle, Slaanesh, and Tzeentch. Obviously, Khorne doesn't get his own lore, but I've done videos on each one of those lores, so again, I will link that in the upper right corner. You can take a look more at the lore of Nurgle. In addition, though, he has some special rules. He's a demon of Nurgle, demonic, hatred towards dwarfs, large target, poisoned attacks, which kind of comes without saying, slime trail, which I can't remember 100% the slime trail rule, but we're going to actually read that real quick. Enemy units do not receive combat result bonuses for attacking the flank or rear of models with this special rule. So slime trail would probably be an expert charge defense. It's probably how I would equate that. Like, since it's pretty much negating flanking and rear charging, charge defense could be the easiest way to kind of look at that, to just neutralize something's charge bonus, because you can't obviously say that it suffers no leadership penalties from those angles. I think that'd be cheating or breaking too many mechanics. That's how I think slime trail would be done. And then obviously it would cause terror because it's a giant monster with its stomach open and antlers, and it probably smells like every bad cheese you've ever smelled mixed in with gym socks and a dead body. So also we get Nurgling Infestation. At the start of each of your turns, one Nurgling base within 6 inches of Kugoth automatically regains a single wound lost earlier in the battle. If there are no wounded Nurgling bases within 6 inches, then nothing happens. This would probably just simply be the ability to summon Nurglings, much in the same way that you can for their Ragnarok Queen, how she can summon little spiderlings. I bet you that's how they would do Nurgling Infestation. Or it would be like a passive regen bonus to any and all Nurgle demons in an aura around him. I feel like that would be very kind of thematic and would make him somewhat of a support character, because to me personally, the lore of Nurgle has a bit of a support kick to it. And I think that some of these characteristics would play very well to that. Now, as far as demonic gifts here, we have Necrotic Missile. Plague-ridden Nurglings constantly burst from Kugoth's body. like foetid hatchlings. Ooh. So it's basically like a stone thrower. It follows those special rules for a stone thrower in the game, and it would chuck a Nurgling 12 to 36 inches, had a strength of 5, and it would ignore armor saves, and they're slow to fire. So how would I see this equated into Total War Warhammer? I think it could be easy just to simply say that he himself is like a long-ranged artillery platform, much in the same way that we get with Orion, or much in the same way as we get as Kotep, who can launch from his Casket of Souls. But maybe instead it's just simply a magic missile bound ability that has a certain recharge. I think both of those have a very high likelihood with it being with it having a high AP damage, poison attacks, as well as probably discouraged, because you're launching a whole entire pustulant hatchling at something, or a Nurgling at something. It's going to affect some leadership. I bet you that'll be kind of the big thing with all of the attacks of Nurgle, is that it'll affect leadership through some sort of like discouraged mechanic, like we get with a lot of those stone throwers or a lot of flamethrowers in the game, stuff like that. So as far as Kugoth coming into the game, though, I think that one of the big questions a lot of people have asked is, like, do you think we will see demons as a standalone faction, demons of chaos? Do you think that we'll see them as individual factions aligned with each member of the pantheon, one of the gods? Or will it be part of Chaos Undivided, and you can then specialize into one of the specific gods, much like you can with Norska? And I think that it's too early to answer that kind of question. I think with the amount of races that are left to Total War Warhammer 3, it doesn't really leave too many on the table, and so possibly doing 4 individual races for each one of the gods would make a lot of sense. But then if you wanted to play Chaos Undivided, how would they do that? You would just have one superpower faction that could do all of it, and then you had your branch off factions. Doable. We see that with some other characters across a lot of other factions, but I think that Nurgle, needless to say, is going to be a very interesting faction, and that'll probably again have high health pool, high melee defense, a lot of leadership mechanics around a lot of aura effects. I imagine that's going to be the big thing with them, is either a lot of health regen and a lot of debilitating leadership through some sort of like virulent plague that constantly does damage and affects leadership around you. Some units like poxwalkers, I bet, which are going to be like some sort of like monstrous infantry. Who knows if they're going to be on a smaller scale, maybe even, but I bet you they could have some sort of aura that whilst in combat you have a reduction to your melee attack, or a reduction to your weapon strength, or a reduction again to your leadership, or just does outright damage to you. I'm very curious to see what we'll get with some of the effects of Nurgle going into Warhammer 3, and I think more importantly, how they're going to change those effects. I know we'll get probably a bevy of different things that we just didn't even consider because we're looking at this from the scope of Total War Warhammer 2. But I'm excited to kind of explore some more of these Demons of Chaos and other things that might possibly be coming with Total War Warhammer 3. If you have any other questions, anything that you'd really like to talk about or hear about from Demons of Chaos, from the Chaos Dwarfs, from the Ogre Kingdoms, from anything, the armies of Kislev, go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. Again, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching here today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what kind of stuff you're excited about with Warhammer 3. But have a good one, and wash your hands and take care.